Hello everybody. Alright, today in this video we are going to talk about how to write an article. It's going to be part of our big project. We're going to focus on how to make a rough draft for that article, and then really the revision part I might throw in later, but right now we're focusing on the very bare basics. And by bare basics I mean we're going to create a skeleton of what our plan is. We're going to leave blanks when we don't know the answers because it's a rough draft, and we're just going to start writing, and most importantly we're going to keep writing. So if we get stuck on something, we'll skip it and just go on to something else. That's how rough drafts work. You don't need to actually make a big, fluid, overarching piece of writing. Also, I don't know very many writers who actually start from the beginning of a text and then work their way down in a fluid, I'm starting with a story and I'm just going to keep going with that story and I'm not going to change. Most people don't do that. Most people start here and then put something in here and then here and then here. Writing is a process of putting pieces together. Now the very first thing that I want us to kind of recognize is that when you're writing, you need to know why you're writing and what you're writing for. So here is what I've given all of you essentially. We're going to be working on this sheet of paper through our thing. So you've all been given your planning for inquiry sheet. This comes straight off of that. You have the question, you have a question of your own. I chose to do an example question: should French and English be Canada's national languages? So my central idea here is that one, Canada needs to recognize its diverse population and its history of eradicating, trying to kill off, indigenous languages. Now, the purpose of what I'm writing an article that I think is going to be meant to persuade people. So, who am I going to persuade? My audience is going to be people who can actually affect change in some way. So, 25 to 65-year-old Canadians. Probably who speak English or French. Now, I'm not going to be doing this in French, so that might be a little rough. Realistically, my audience is English speaking, but I'm going to say English or French because realistically I want people who speak a national language of Canada to listen to this. So my goal is to persuade speakers of Canada's national languages to adopt new national languages. I'm not going to say that French and English shouldn't be Canada's national languages in this. I'm just saying that there needs to be more national languages than just French and English. I feel like I said something there. Oh well. So, the form that I'm going to be doing, I said it was going to be an article. And I think that the context for this, since its real goal is to affect change, so I'm going to be making a really hard political stance, taking that big this is as far as I can go on the argument kind of side, without saying just straight up we should get rid of national languages altogether. I'm going to say that I'm going to put this on a petition website. Petition websites are websites where people sign on to things to send it to the government. So this is going to be my pitch on that website for people who are should I sign this petition? It's yes, you should sign this petition because of this. Here's my article explaining why. So how do I write an article? Well, first things first, you need to go collect sources. So I've collected a few. I've got an article on Indigenous languages in Canada from the Canadian Encyclopedia. I've got from the Office of the Commissioner of Official Languages, the top 5 languages spoken in Canada. I've got a CBC article about language and how language is changing throughout the nation. And then I've got an article written by that's a very well sourced article, by the way, written by a third-year English and Political Sciences student at the University of British Columbia. So I've got my sources. You should at this point also have your sources. That was the backside of the Planning for Inquiry sheet. So, what is the basic structure of an article? Let's see. Everything on this planet, if it is a written piece, has an introduction. There are 2 kinds of introductions, good ones and bad ones. Bad ones are not planned out. Good ones are very planned out. And the thing that I've noticed that makes an introduction better than most is that it's planned out, and also it's not the first thing that you do. So let's just leave 3 blanks there and move on. After you've got your introduction, I'm trying to persuade people, so I'm going to use a format that I call teach, preach, reach. So So in the teach section, we're going to be sharing a lot of the information that you gather from your sources. In preach, that's where you give your personal opinion and really ham it up if it's for a petition website. You believe in this wholeheartedly, and my assumption is that you've chosen topics that you actually do care about and do have strong opinions on. And then reach is where you start proposing those changes that you want to see. Now, I said that everything has an introduction. Even my lesson plans, by the way, have introductions that I think about and really plan out. So if everything has an introduction, that also means that most things have conclusions. Conclusions sometimes we forget about. We just don't get to them, and then we leave people hanging on the last sentence of our big expository. These are the changes we need to see. But then there's no summarization of what goes on. So in the same way that we start something off strong, we want to make sure that we can finish it off with that summary that really hammers home everything that we talked about in this article. Now you can take each of these points, introduction, teach, preach, reach, conclusions, as just a single paragraph and write me a 5-paragraph essay. You might have more to say, so your introduction is a paragraph, your teach section is 3 paragraphs, your preach section is 3 paragraphs. Your reach section is 3.5 paragraphs. Your conclusion is 1 large paragraph. That's up to you. But this is the general format for an article. Also for a blog post, by the way, there isn't a huge difference beyond just blog posts are written to be more personal and articles tend to be written for more of a removal of yourself. So if you're writing about yourself, you're usually doing a blog post. That's not always true. Psychology Today has a lot of experts come in and write article-style blog posts. Blogs just mean web blogs. It's a log of data on the internet. So, don't get caught up on the language. We're writing an article. I don't know what we're going to put in our introduction because I don't know what we're doing in here yet. Let's check out our information. So, teach. What do I want to teach people? Well, I want to teach them what the top 5 languages spoken in Canada are, so I'll make a note of that. By the way, English, French, Mandarin, Cantonese, and Punjabi, which is pretty cool. So, top 5 spoken languages. I'll leave that alone for now. The next thing, after I talk about the top 5 spoken languages, I want to let people know that that a growing number of people speak more than French or English in their home. So 14.5% of Canadians speak more than that language. So and then I think we start off with the top 5 most spoken languages. We talk about there are more languages being spoken in Canada than just French and English. Let's bring it down to a bit of the Indigenous languages in Canada, because there's somewhere around 70 distinct Indigenous languages, falling into 10 separate language categories, and there used to be, by the way, a lot more. Here's a map that I can dig into and go look, here's this part of the Northwest Territories, or look, I can go over here to Haida Gwaii and zoom in on their languages. So for our rough draft, I'm going to say just do so Indigenous languages don't have the same speakership. That's in part because of this, but I'm going to save this source for right now. I'm not going to talk about how Canada attempted to erase Indigenous languages yet, because I want to save that for my preach section. So I think that a really good transition from talking about Indigenous languages in Canada would be to go into Canada's history with Indigenous languages. And that's where I'm going to dig into this. I might also talk a bit about the Indian Act and talk about how it was literally illegal to speak languages, and the trauma associated with residential schools and things like that. So that's what that section is going to be for. I'm going to talk about the way that our government is set up. So we have what's called a representative government. The idea behind that is it should reflect the population. So if 15% of people almost speak languages other than English or French, when do we hit a threshold where it makes sense to represent that? And let's just do a quick thing. There's, let's say, 36 million people in Canada, and I want to know what 15% of that is. So that's nearly 5.5 million people that we're talking about. So does 5.5 million people constitute a linguistically diverse group? Maybe. I'm going to argue yes, because that's the whole point of this paper. You can disagree with me, by the way. I'm doing this to show you how it feels to take that stance. I keep wanting to pound my fist, forgetting that you can't see me. Canada's history with Indigenous languages, representative government. I don't know what else I'm going to put there, but it's going to be big. I don't know how I'm going to transition into that because of that, and so let's talk about how I'm going to start ending this off. We need to rewrite the National Languages Act. So I want legal change, and I want us to start protecting dying languages. So oh, you know what? I'm going to make an argument, because it's my opinion. I'm going to say that language is a reflection of culture. And so that's why we have an obligation to protect dying languages. And then finally, because I want to start moving into our conclusion, I'll talk about reconciliation. And that's for, let's call it linguistic genocide, because we're fancy. And again, we can sneak some things from this article into that point so that it's backed up and stronger for people who might would say, well, that's just a very like emotional response. You can say, no, look, it's backed up. Okay, so for conclusions now. Well, let's start with let's actually go back up to our introduction before we write the end. We've got our information, our opinion, and our changes. So our introduction should reflect that we've got a need for looking at the way that languages work. So overview of languages in Canada. Then we're going to have a look at like our opinion stuff, so that's going to be a what do I want to call this? I don't know, so I'm going to leave it blank. And then we're going to have our reach stuff, and that's going to be our moral obligation, rewrite the national languages, so I'll call that call to action. I'm doing that for two reasons. One, because there was a national like pamphlet called the 94 Calls to Action that came out of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It ties into what I'm talking about here. See, when you do your introduction afterwards, you can make it really strong by doing that. I want to transition from overview of languages in Canada to maybe just like explain why it's worth looking at. And then for conclusions, well, let's see, what did we learn? We learned about in the teach section, I talk about Canada having a diverse linguistic population. Some of whom had their language rights stolen from them. In the preach section, I talk about Canada's history, so more of that's theft, representative government, language as a reflection of culture. So for national identity. So I'm going to say that in my conclusion, I'm going to talk about how language is a tool for national identity, and Canada, if it wants to maintain the idea that it's a nation, needs to actually reflect that it has these diverse languages. Otherwise, it's just a state where people live without any sort of uniform identity. And then in the final, like last bars of the conclusion, the music is fading. We can talk about change is I don't know how to spell necessary, so deal with it. Nice. We'll say that change is necessary. Period, to make it stronger. This is a skeleton. So, this is the end of this video. I'm going to create another video now where you can actually watch me take this skeleton of things that I created using these 4 sources and my own personal opinions, and we're going to try and turn it into an actual, like, full-fledged rough draft. Alright, if you've missed anything from that, please feel free to go back and look at it. What we did is we created a skeleton. We left blanks for things that I didn't know what to say and filled them in later. And the most important thing that we did is we started writing, and we kept writing. We didn't stop at any point to just say, no, I can't do this. No, it's 20 minutes till class is over, I'm putting away my books. We kept going, and we were able to build this in not actually that long of a time. So, you have the power to do this. I believe in you. Peace out.